Today, the Senate will vote on the confirmation of Dr. John King to be the next Secretary of Education. While there's only a year left in the Obama presidency, this is still one of the most important jobs in Washington because the Department of Education has a powerful set of tools available that it can use to stand up for people who are struggling with student loan debt, and tools to help make a quality, affordable college education a reality for millions of Americans. Secretary of Education must be one of the most difficult jobs in Washington because for years there has been some kind of problem at the Department of Education that has made it practically impossible to get the department to put the interests of students ahead of the interests of private contractors and for-profit colleges that are making the big money off our students. The department has powerful tools to make sure that fraudulent colleges aren't sucking down billions of taxpayer dollars in student loans. But for the most part, these tools gather dust on the shelf while shady institutions like Corinthian College spend years gobbling up taxpayer money while they defraud their own students. The department has powerful tools to help students when they get ripped off by fraudulent colleges. But for years, it has been like pulling out your own teeth simply to get relief for the victims who got cheated by for-profit colleges like Corinthian. Now, there are literally dozens of examples of how the Department of Education's trillion-dollar student loan bank has been putting profits for companies and for-profit colleges ahead of the needs of students. One of the worst has been the bank's approach to overseeing the student loan servicing companies that are paid by the government to collect student loan payments. Consider the case of Navient, a student loan servicer that caught red-handed ripping off tens of thousands of active duty members of the military. 2 years ago, the Department of Justice and the FDIC fined the company $100 million for breaking the law and overcharging our active duty military on their student loans. But the Department of Education didn't take any action against Navient. Instead of following up on the lead of the Justice Department and using the Justice Department's evidence, no, the Department of Education announced its own separate review of whether soldiers were harmed. A year later, they released their results, and Navient, notwithstanding the fact that Navient was already sending checks to thousands of service members under the DOJ and FDIC agreement, the Department of Education's student loan bank concluded that everything was just fine and that the department had no need to impose any additional fines or restrictions on Navient. In fact, things were so fine that the department's bank rewarded Navient by renewing a $100 million contract. Now, if that sounds stinky to you, it should. The department's inspector general took a close look at what was going on over at the department's bank, and 2 weeks ago, they released a scathing report on the bank's whitewash. The IG slammed the department for a report that was a complete and utter mess, loaded with errors, calling for, quote, inconsistent and inadequate actions. The IG concluded that the Department of Education's happy-face press release announcing that everything was fine with the servicer was, quote, unsupported and inaccurate. You know, when a private company breaks the law and steals from American soldiers who are literally in the field fighting overseas, those companies should be held accountable. The Justice Department held Navient accountable. The FDIC held Navient accountable. But the Department of Education's bank decided it was more important to protect Navient than to watch out for our military students. Let's not mince words. The Navient fiasco is outrageous, but it is not surprising. At a Senate hearing 2 years ago, I asked James Runcie, who runs the Department of Education's Student Loan Bank, how he could turn around and renew the contract of a company like Navient that had just copped to ripping off American soldiers. His answer, essentially, was that moving borrowers away from Navient would simply be too disruptive. Senator Harkin said at the time, that sounded an awful lot like too big to fail, and Senator Harkin was right. So long as that theory remains the operating principle of the Department of Education, the American people can forget about the law, because there will be no real limits on how much money big private companies and large fraudulent schools can steal from students and taxpayers. Now, Dr. King didn't create any of these problems. These problems have grown and festered over a long time, and they won't be easy to solve. For several weeks now, Dr. King and I have talked about these issues, and I believe he understands the magnitude of the task he faces. He has committed, in no uncertain terms, to a top-down review of the way the student loan program is administered and the way that the department oversees financial institutions. He has announced that he will force all of the major student loan servicers to review their records and make refunds to all members of the military who were illegally ripped off. And he has embraced strong new proposals to protect borrowers who are taken in by fraudulent colleges so they can get their money back. These are serious steps in the right direction, and for those reasons, I will vote for him today. But let's be clear, this is not the end of the story. Dr. King has an enormous amount of work to do to get the department's higher education house in order, and the American people will be watching closely for results. One of the first things that must be done is a total reform of student loan servicing to make sure that nothing like the Navient disaster ever happens again. And here are 5 simple principles that should guide that reform. First, put students and families first every time, every decision. The department exists to serve students, not student loan companies, and it's time they acted like it. Second, punish bad actors. Navient broke the law and cheated soldiers, but the department bent over backwards to protect them. Right now, Navient owes the federal government $22 million that it stole in another scam, and the department hasn't even bothered to collect it. The department needs to show that it is willing and able to punish companies that break the rules, and that includes kicking them out of the student loan program if necessary. Third, change the financial incentives for servicers. 2 years ago, the department renegotiated the servicer contracts and basically just ended up paying the companies more money for the same bad outcomes. No more. Our country pours millions of tax dollars into these companies, and it's time to leverage those dollars to make sure that the companies are working for students. Fourth, release more data. The Department of Education adamantly refuses to share basic data about the student loan program with anyone, even other folks within the Department of Education. That means that nobody can even see how this bank is being run. It is time for some sunshine. And fifth, take responsibility for aggressive oversight of student loan servicers. The department needs to act before this problem metastasizes. And when the department doesn't have the tools to act, then get out of the way and let the CFPB or other federal agencies do their job. 5 simple principles. Everyone in government who is serious about standing up for the tens of millions of student loan borrowers in this country should embrace them. Because we shouldn't be running the student loan program to create profits for private companies. We should run it for students. We are facing a crisis in higher education. Student debt is exploding, crushing our young people and threatening the economy. Opportunity is slipping away from millions of Americans. The time for reform is now, not in the next presidency, not 5 years from now, but now. Reform starts with the Department of Education. And if he is confirmed today, it is my strong hope that Dr. King will make fixing these problems a top priority from his first day on the job to his last day on the job.